Hi, this is Dr. Stack again. I just wanted to do this video. I wasn't happy with my last take. So, can a new law make wrongdoing legal, and is that constitutional? Now, these are the issues I brought to the attention of said judge, and I mean, I felt he was extremely abusive of me, and it was very hurtful, and it was disorientating actually to be the target, particularly when his judgment went to the press, with the press not asking me for what, it was if it was all kind of orchestrated, and I can't say it was or it wasn't, but it looked like it was all orchestrated to ensure that my evidence would be gaslighted in a way that would be minimised and written off as entirely baseless. Like, I have a kind of a very good record now from data analytics that would put, me in a really high global, stratospheric position, and that kind of tactics, really is extremely distressing. And for the judge to do this to me, knowing that I'm a super brain, was absolutely reprehensible, and it was horrendous abuse, and it takes a while to recover from that kind of abuse. But he's not the first judge, and but the other judge that I met, Judge Justice Michael O'Higgins, I mean, he couldn't have been nicer, and he was very quick to grasp the complexity, and he didn't discriminate against me at all as a litigant person. So perhaps he was a unique judge in the legal system. I mean, you couldn't meet a nicer man than Judge O'Higgins, and but he dealt with the issues. Like, he didn't, he wasn't defensive. He didn't have this defense wall or narcissistic or streak or sociopathic streak or whatever dark churchyard streak that seemed to come out of this other judge that I felt was the dark side was projected onto me, and I was made the scapegoat, or I was made the person that was wrong, or the person that, the whole thing was twisted. That's what the narcissistic mind does. It goes from black to white, and it twists things around, and you're looking at this is totally unreasonable, and it's not, it just makes no sense. His judgment made no sense. It was all like, was it surgically, manipulated to, it was nonsense. And then it presented as baseless to the press. I mean, that's what was really hurtful. There was a load of press that, took this as gospel. I mean, it was no more gospel. It was pure and utter manipulation. And at the time, the day before the election, worse still, and the way it portrayed me, I mean, there was a lot of relatives and a load of people are bluffed, bluffed by this nonsense that he did. I mean, it really is bordering on on extreme abuse to do that to a person, So I'm just raising it as a concern, but the judges are, there's no accountability there, so there's nothing I can do. I mean, I can say, like, I can try and counter what is said about me in the press here, but there's no press looking at this, and I have only a very small following compared to, the big news outlets, Euronews, and the Journal and the Irish Times and RT News. I mean, like, look at all the people watching that, and they're saying, I mean, I'm in a league that none of those people are in if they were to read my data analytics, because it's not on my website of work or anything. No, they don't know how high up I'm, my ratings are. They don't, because I'm doing the data analytics now, so I know exactly where I'm positioned relative to where they are, and I wouldn't like to see how high up it is. But I mean, like, they've messed with the wrong woman, basically. But I mean, like, that's not here or there. It's the truth that one should be telling, and the facts. So let's just move away from that now and just say that I'm very, very distressed that this judge was so abusive, and it really caused me incredible traumatic, like what I've said in the other papers, extreme trauma. And it's going to take a while to recover from the trauma that this judge caused me, hugely, because of the timing and the press and all of that involved in the election, and also because I was the presidential candidate, and the way he tore me down was, in the judgment was anything short. It was shocking and extreme, and it was so wrong. It was so twisted. I don't know why he did it. I don't know why he did it. It was beyond beggars belief that he'd do that to somebody of my intellect and my ethics and my record. If anyone wants to know what it is, just email me. I'll give it to them. Hi everybody. Today I want to ask a simple but serious question. Can a new law make wrongdoing legal? I mean, I've been trying to figure this out for a long time because it's really complex. And is that constitutional? I was the first person that wrote the major paper about the acts of omission in the in the whistleblowing legislation, and I handed it to a particular minister, and I asked him, what should be done about it, and this is suggesting what should have been done about it, but it wasn't. I know there was the issues about omissions, and it took me years to write it, and then after writing it, I couldn't sleep for a number of weeks. I remember it was so distressing, and then when I eventually was able to give it to somebody, I was treated appallingly. So, and then the judge, was horrible to me, absolutely horrible. But I mean, I don't really, let's forget about, the judge, because maybe there was somebody else behind the scenes, who knows. So today I want to make a simple but serious question. Can a new law make wrongdoing legal? And is that constitutional? I mean, that's why I went for the judicial review, and I hadn't ever done a judicial review, and it was a really difficult challenge, I mean, that's the one thing about, in fairness to the legal profession, I've learned a huge amount from I have had to be a legal litigant for a long time, and I've learned a huge amount from the journey around, from law, from the work that I've had to do, but it never got me anywhere. There was no respect for my knowledge or my knowledge. Never anybody was respectful of my knowledge, which was massive compared to other people in research and everything. It was huge. But now I'm writing all about it, so I'm getting huge international interest. So it's paying off now. But it was very painful never to get any recognition or acknowledgement in the courts. So can a new law, because you see I'm a legal litigant, it's the same thing, just what I'm saying, you're invalidated repeatedly. So can a new law make wrongdoing legal? And is that constitutional? This isn't about one minister or case, it's about a deeper issue in Irish democracy. What happens when government changes the law after mistakes have been made? This is just governance now we're talking about. Everyone makes mistakes, and we all have to own up to them, as much as we can. Ireland has strong whistleblowing laws. They're meant to protect people who speak up about wrongdoing in the public interest, which is what I was doing. I was speaking up in the public interest, and I was hit with massive costs, and I was speaking in the public interest. I mean, was that not the judge being very biased against me also? He must have known I was speaking in the public interest, and was like that. He had it in for me big time. Why? What did I ever do to that judge? But sometimes, I never did a thing to him. But sometimes the way a law is carried out isn't perfect. There can be omissions, things that should have been done but weren't. Yes, failure to act, for example. If a court looked at these omissions, they might count as failures or even unlawful acts by the state or public bodies. Then, instead of owning these problems, taking responsibility, being accountable, a new amending law appears. You see the difference? It quietly rewrites the rules so that the earlier gaps or mistakes no longer look unlawful. In effect, legality is retrofitted onto illegality. This raises constitutional red flags. I mean, this is why I went to the courts, because I had concerns. First, the rule of law, the idea that all acts of government must be lawful at the time they're done. You can't break the rules today and fix them tomorrow by changing the law. The Constitution doesn't allow the state to rewrite history. Well, you'd imagine the judge would have made that comment. I mean, it's not his job not to to act in accordance with his duties, to be the kind of oversight or a second legal avenue to test, the actions of the executive, which is the separation of powers. It's the courts, not the government, that decide what's lawful. And, you're getting, like, if you make a protective disclosure, you'll have this fellow and that person sending you, this isn't, you're not a worker. That's not they're not entitled to say that. That's not lawful. That has to be decided by a court, and it's done right, left, and centre. People walk away, and this is their first line of wall. The first wall is to break you, saying that you're not a worker. That's the first wall. So you can see the defence going up straight away, as I've written in my paper, why oversight becomes obstruction. The first wall is to attack you on the worker rather than to deal with the substantial issues. Say, if you made a protective disclosure in good faith, you'd imagine they'd want to deal with that first rather than put up all their defensive walls so that they don't want to do the protective disclosure. It's a sign of the same thing. The oversight it becomes obstruction. I've met it several times, and they just, then they go quiet, and they say nothing, and you hear nothing back. So this is the thing, but that's not the way it should be. But you see, I'm saying this is not the way it should be at all. It should all be arbitration rather than this black white, and putting up defence. We can't admit any fault. We're defence, and that's not going to solve anything. So if it's the courts, not the government, that decide what's lawful, when a new act makes past omissions suddenly legal, it edges into the court's territory. Now, when I raised this, really, I was raising this in the judicial review, and it was more or less, you'd imagine that would have been the proper judgment here, or rather than, sorry, you shouldn't be edging into our territory. Like, that's the way it was made personalised, that I was edging. No, it was the new act, not doing what it did, was edging into the court's territory. In other words, it's the courts that should have dealt with the issue, not the executive, in order to make sure it was constitutional, and they'd have to own their hands up. Perhaps the original law was unworkable, for example. I mean, that's another way of looking at it. Maybe it was unworkable, it was too powerful, or whatever it was. But mistakes were made, and I mean, mistakes were also made, in the when the economy crashed, and there was investigations and so on. But this seems to have, I don't know, this. I'm the first person to raise this, but I'm sure people knew about it, but didn't want anyone else to know about it. But we're a democracy. The people should know about this. Third, accountability. Article 28 of the Constitution says government is responsible to the Dáil. If an amendment shields departments from scrutiny, that responsibility becomes meaningless. Fourth, fair procedures and legitimate expectations. People who relied on the older law, for example, whistleblowers, had a right to expect the state to honour it. And I was just a researcher in whistleblowing. I just sent a research paper. Changing the law afterwards can undermine that trust in those rights, particularly when it weakens it significantly or appears to. Finally, European law, the EU Whistleblower Directive, sets minimum standards. If domestic law weakens them, that's not just bad policy, it also breaches Ireland Constitution's obligation to respect EU law directives and charters, and we made that point. And none of this was in the judgment. So all the positive points we made and the real valid legal points we made were gaslighted, and minor issues were blown out of more proportion. That's typical of what gaslighters do. They'll look into small little things and they exaggerate them, and then there's a code almost to the press, and it becomes, the whole thing is baseless. When we actually had an excellent case, because I'm very thorough. I mean, I wouldn't have the amount of traffic into my papers now that I have if I wasn't extremely rigorous and very thorough and very, very forensic. So there's no way that the press should be submitting my baseless and everything, and then I kind of undermined the other side were saying that I got no support as if I was a half-wit, and I could see this other council, and I mean the coding she was using, the codes they were using was dreadful. I mean, and I never use codes in anything. It was dreadful to see the code. It was all like it was engineered, orchestrated to try and deliberately make our side totally baseless and groundless. So there was no legitimacy to our constitutional challenge. In fact, there was huge legitimacy, as you can see here, not just on the block, but also on the issue with regard to this particular issue, which I think should be sorted. So there are two issues here which are still suspicion concerning constitution. One, whether the block as it stands is constitutional. That's contrary to constitution. And also this rewriting of legal history, that to me sounds very constitutionally questionable. And we were trying to sort those things out, but unfortunately my particular case was decided the day before the election, and it almost was as if it was designed, and the language used to make our case baseless, when in fact it was entirely grounded in excellence rather than otherwise. So I'm really upset about what that judge did. It was gross violations of my rights and abuse, and he got away with it, and nobody said anything. and nobody said anything. I know the extent to which, I know the work. I did 80 edits on that. I took in, there was a friend that arrived kind of late on the scene, and she had extra seafood standards. She had the kind of administrative side of things that helped me with that. But I did 80 edits, and for this judge to describe my excellence as baseless was nothing short of complete distortion and misrepresentation of the truth. So it wasn't just there was errors in law. No, it was much worse than errors in law. It was deliberate distortion, in my opinion, to present a view which would fit in with the narrative that there was nothing unconstitutional to worry about the day before the election. So it was absolutely horrific. And then I believe that perhaps because of this knowledge, my knowledge was such that nobody in government wanted somebody like me to be presidentially nominated, because I would have had major issues signing a constitution or swearing into a presidency unless these matters were legally sorted out the right way. I would have. And, it asked questions about the new president, how she must know about these. I mean, she's a lawyer or a barrister. I mean, and how could she, swear to a constitution that's seems to be very, these two issues are dark. There's a lot of probably areas where we could look at it, but certainly these are two clear, I'd say breaches, but there are major issues which need to be sorted out in a way. I don't know how they can be sorted out, but I'm sure maybe with the current. But I mean, the fact is that yes, this the way it was done was very highly questionable. Yeah, what can you do now? I don't know what you can do. I mean, this is all a matter for the courts, but this judge didn't want the courts to look at it at all. And, gave the impression there was no, what I was doing was absolutely baseless. I mean, it was completely and utterly inaccurate, what he said. Totally inaccurate. And I have but it wasn't that. It was deliberately, it wasn't just that it was error in law. It was deliberately twisted. So there wasn't just an error in law like you'd have an appeal. You just talked about error in law. No, it was deliberately done to discredit me in order to, and I mean, it was as if I was been studied, to kind of really upset me as well, and to present me as, unstable or something, this kind of way. So it was like that, that's where the gaslight comes in, that they do it to, and then you're a bit of a nutcase. You see the way they're trying to do that, to deliberately gaslight you, so to try and give the impression you're an unstable person, when in fact you're a highly sensitive, really bright person, and they do that knowing that this will also lead to the impression that it's a baseless case. So it was really clever the way he did it, but in fact it was very vindictive and extremely clever, but very, very morally and ethically wrong. So we're not talking about areas of law here. It's way beyond that. It's severe narcissistic abuse, which if you're subjected to it, I mean, we had that in the previous video where, in Northern Ireland, people are destroyed by this, getting this every day of the week going into court. They're destroyed by it. So I'm saying we need a new system, and even in protective disclosures, I've written a paper where I feel we need the arbitration here. Rather than putting up the wall, you're not a worker, do the arbitration and try and get this thing done, and if it doesn't work out, go beyond that. Putting up the defence walls when there's a real issue to be dealt with, try and deal with the issue through the arbitration in a protective disclosures policy, and after that, then if that doesn't work, go to the adversarial. Even the protective disclosures is very adversarial, so you can expect that it's highly gaslighted in favour of the institution. So the very first thing, you're not a worker, and they're not entitled to say you're not a worker unless they can prove it in court, but that's their first line, hope you'll go away. So you can see immediately when somebody does that they're incompetent and they're defensive, and they're not the person that should be dealing with this. So I've seen that loads of times now. I've let a lot of them go, but some of them, I'm just I won't say I'm testing them because I have serious issues with one or two issues, but that's the usual first line, you're not a worker, and they're not entitled to say that. That's not legally, unless it's proven in a court. It's just a legal opinion, and it's, you see, the way they intimidate you. You're intimidated that way, So and this sort of worker is that whatever worker, if there's a grey area, no matter what the area is, they have to prove that you're not a worker, unless there's an exact case, say for example, you made a complaint against a county council, say, with regard to the nomination process, that you weren't fairly treated by, say, a county council. And a county council says you're not a worker, and then that's actually not legally that has no legal standing unless another county council went to a court and said, in the same circumstances, you're not a worker. So there's an identical case law that says that's the legal standing there, and then that's you're not a worker, because there's a law that's been tested that said that particular county council said that if you were in the same situation, that's all. That's it. You can't just say, these are things that you're not a worker. I mean, if there's a grey area, any kind of a grey area, then they have to go to court. You see, but you see, this is the defence. So I don't agree with this anyway, because if you're making a protective disclosure, usually you're wanting a resolution about an issue. Sometimes sometimes you need a resolution and you need arbitration, but there's lacking of that. And then once this black and white thinking goes in or is embedded in the procedures, which is the gaslighting, it's normally in favour of the institution, and the person that's examining it, or as on the other side, is, how am I going to save the institution? We can't be wrong. So the defence walls go straight up, you're not a worker, and then you say, sorry, that's not legally sound, that's not legally sound. So and they're making you try to prove it when the onus is on them to prove that you're not. There's the twistedness, and when you meet that, you're wasting your time dealing with someone like that. That they're gaslighting you. So that's going on the whole time, and this is what goes on in the courts as well. So you can see that it's not just going on in the courts; it's going on anywhere where you have kind of an adversarial oversight system. And that's why my paper, why oversight becomes obstruction, is so popular, because it's everywhere in the oversight system. So it's all money to outsource to solicitors or other kinds of people, money that should be spent on solving the problem, whatever the issue is raised, if it's possible, through arbitration. So I disagree with this adversarial system completely, because it generates more and more of this darkness and defensiveness, which never leads to a resolution. So there's just a couple of points there. It's all linked in into psychology and conflict resolution and arbitration and democracy and justice. It's all. I can link it all in to narcissism or sociopathy, dark church, right, all that sort of thing. It's destroying the place, that mentality, and it's destroying democracy, and it's taking over. So I am trying to say that if we move to an arbitration-focused vision of justice, we have a chance of turning democracy around. And I'm being very reasonable, and that judge was absolutely horrific to me. But you see, he was gaslighting me because he knew he thought it would destabilise me and I would come across as unstable, and this would suit his narrative down to the ground. Isn't that shocking? Absolutely shocking. And I managed to find a way to counteract this gaslighting, but it's shocking in the extreme. It's a huge abuse of power by the judge, and but it's widespread. Sadly, it's widespread. So I'm just a particularly sensitive person, but it's widespread. Is like my research, my paper on the illusion of represent. Justice is an illusion for the non-representative. That's widespread. If you read that paper, what happened to me is widespread. Very, very sad indeed. Very sad indeed, and a real indictment of our current justice system, but not just ours, Northern Ireland, England, the UK, US, Canada, other places as well. So there's a little bit of arbitration in Canada, but it's there's millions suffering from inaccessibility to justice, because there is simply not an arbitration for us. The black and white justice system we have are a complete failure for the majority in the squeeze middle, which is the majority of people, and constitute millions worldwide.